The room was alive with energy as the crowd settled into their seats, buzzing with anticipation. It was one of those events where everyone knew something big was about to happen. The stage was set with a sleek podium, bright lights illuminating every corner and cameras positioned strategically to capture every moment. People had gathered from all walks of life: political enthusiasts, journalists, students, and even casual viewers who just wanted to see what the fuss was about. This wasn't just another panel discussion, it was a showdown waiting to happen. At the center of it all stood a man who needed no introduction. He was a familiar face in political circles, known for his sharp mind and unshakable confidence. His name was Leavitt, a seasoned analyst and former White House advisor who had spent years navigating the complexities of government policy. Today, he was here to talk about accountability, a topic that had been dominating headlines for weeks. But little did anyone know, this event would turn into something far more intense than anyone expected. As Leavitt took his place at the podium, the murmurs in the room grew louder. He scanned the audience with a calm but piercing gaze, taking in the sea of faces before him. Some were eager supporters, others skeptical critics, and a few simply curious observers. Among them sat a journalist whose reputation preceded her. She was known for her bold questioning and unwavering stance on liberal issues. Her presence alone added an extra layer of tension to the atmosphere. Everyone could feel it. The air was thick with the promise of confrontation. When the moderator finally opened the floor for questions, hands shot up like wildfire. But there was one person everyone noticed right away. Sitting near the front row, pen in hand and microphone ready, she leaned forward with unmistakable determination. Her question wasn't going to be polite or predictable. It was going to cut straight to the heart of the matter. And sure enough, when the moderator called on her, she didn't disappoint. "Mr. Leavitt," she began, her voice steady but laced with challenge. "There's been a lot of talk lately about the misuse of presidential power. Specifically, many critics argue that during his time in office, Donald Trump repeatedly abused his authority, whether through controversial executive orders or attacks on the free press. What's your take on these accusations?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward Leavitt, waiting to see how he would respond. Would he dodge the question, deflect blame, or rise to the occasion? For a brief moment he said nothing, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Then with a slow exhale he looked directly at her, not with anger or frustration but with a quiet intensity that commanded attention. "Thank you for the question," he began, his tone measured and deliberate. "It's an important one, and I appreciate the opportunity to address it. But let me start by saying this. We need to separate criticism from evidence. Just because someone disagrees with a leader's decisions doesn't automatically mean those decisions constitute abuse of power." His response sent ripples through the audience. Some nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The journalist, however, wasn't satisfied. She pressed further, probing deeper into the issue. But Leavitt remained unfazed, his composure unshaken. He knew this was only the beginning, and he was ready. What unfolded next was nothing short of electrifying. With each passing second, the stakes grew higher and the tension in the room became almost palpable. No one could have predicted just how far this exchange would go, or how deeply it would resonate with people watching around the world. Little did they know, this was just the tip of the iceberg. This part sets the scene, introduces the main characters, and builds suspense to hook the audience. The language is simple, natural, and engaging, ensuring readers stay invested in the story. Let me know if you'd like me to continue expanding the next parts. Leavitt's calm demeanor didn't waver as he continued, his voice steady and deliberate. He leaned slightly forward, gripping the edges of the podium with both hands. The room was silent now, every person hanging on his next words. "Let me give you an example," he said, his tone firm but not confrontational. "When we talk about executive orders or decisions made by a president, it's crucial to look at context. Every administration, regardless of party, has used its authority in ways that critics have called into question. But are we holding everyone to the same standard? That's the real issue here." The journalist sitting in the front row shifted in her seat, her pen tapping nervously against her notebook. She wasn't expecting him to turn the table so quickly. "But Mr. Leavitt," she interjected, her voice rising just a touch, "aren't there clear differences between policy disagreements and actual abuse of power? For instance, many argue that Trump's attacks on the media crossed a line. Isn't that something worth addressing?" Leavitt nodded slowly, acknowledging her point, without conceding ground. "Of course it's worth discussing," he replied. "But let's be honest, presidents have always had contentious relationships with the press. Remember Nixon, or even Obama, who faced accusations of stifling whistleblowers? The difference often lies in how these actions are framed depending on who's in charge. What some call strong leadership, others label authoritarianism. It's subjective." His response struck a nerve. The journalist hesitated for a moment, clearly caught off guard. She hadn't anticipated him bringing up past administrations, especially ones from her own side of the political spectrum. The audience, too, seemed divided. Some scribbled notes furiously, while others whispered to their neighbors, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Leavitt pressed on, sensing he had the upper hand. "Take Obama's drone program, for example," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Hundreds of strikes were carried out under his watch, many outside declared war zones. Innocent lives were lost, and yet, where was the outcry then? Was that not an overreach of executive power? Or what about Bill Clinton's use of executive privilege during various scandals? Why does that rarely come up in these discussions?" The journalist's face flushed slightly, though she tried to mask it with a practiced smile. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. Leavitt's points weren't just rhetorical, they were backed by facts, and she knew it. The moderator, sensing the growing tension, attempted to intervene. "Let's keep this civil, folks," he said lightly, trying to ease the mood. But the spark had already been lit, and there was no turning back. "You're cherry-picking examples," the journalist finally shot back, her voice louder now, tinged with frustration. "We're talking about consistent patterns of behavior here, not isolated incidents." Her accusation hung in the air, sharp and pointed, but Leavitt didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly as if considering her words carefully. "Cherry-picking?" he repeated, his tone almost amused. "If pointing out historical precedents is cherry-picking, then yes, I suppose I am. But isn't it fair to compare apples to apples? If we're going to criticize one leader for certain actions, shouldn't we hold others to the same standard? Otherwise, aren't we just playing politics?" The audience erupted into murmurs, some nodding approvingly while others shook their heads in disagreement. The journalist glanced around, perhaps hoping to find support in the crowd, but the mixed reactions only added to her discomfort. She adjusted her glasses, a small, nervous gesture, and tried to regain control of the conversation. "It's not about comparing leaders," she countered, her voice firmer now. "It's about accountability. Abuse of power is abuse of power, regardless of who's doing it. And when someone uses their position to undermine institutions or attack freedoms, that's a problem we can't ignore." Leavitt raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by her persistence. "I agree," he said simply. "Accountability is essential. But let's not confuse accountability with bias. If we're truly committed to fairness, then we need to apply the same rules to everyone. Anything less undermines the very principles we claim to defend." The exchange was electrifying, each word landing like a punch in a verbal sparring match. The journalist clenched her jaw, visibly struggling to formulate her next move. Meanwhile, Leavitt stood tall, exuding confidence without arrogance. He wasn't just defending a position, he was challenging the audience to think critically, to question their assumptions, and to demand consistency in how leaders were judged. As the moderator once again stepped in to steer the conversation, elsewhere the tension remained thick. The journalist sat back in her chair, her pen now motionless in her hand. She had walked into this debate ready to challenge, but Leavitt's calm yet relentless logic had thrown her off balance. And while the panel moved on to other topics, the ripple effects of their clash were far from over. Outside the venue, phones buzzed with notifications as clips of the exchange began circulating online. Social media platforms lit up with reactions, opinions flying fast and furious. Supporters praised Leavitt for exposing hypocrisy, while critics accused him of sidestepping the issue. But one thing was undeniable. The conversation had struck a chord, sparking debates that would continue long after the event ended. For the journalist, however, the battle wasn't over. She knew she still had a chance to redeem herself, to prove that her arguments held weight. But as she watched Leavitt field questions from other attendees with ease, she couldn't shake the feeling that this round had gone to him. The stakes were higher now, and the pressure was mounting. Whatever happened next, it was clear that this wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. This part keeps the energy high, delves deeper into the argument, and maintains a natural flow. Let me know if you'd like me to proceed with part 3. The room was alive with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your heart race. The journalist sat clutching her microphone, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. She wasn't used to being on the defensive like this. Normally, she was the one asking the tough questions, the one pushing people out of their comfort zones. But Leavitt had flipped the script, turning her own arguments back on her in a way that left her scrambling. Still, she wasn't about to back down. Not now. You're avoiding the core issue, she said, her voice rising slightly as she leaned forward again. This isn't just about comparing presidents or dredging up old examples. We're talking about patterns, consistent actions that erode trust in institutions. When someone repeatedly attacks the press or undermines checks and balances, that's not just politics. That's dangerous. Her words hung in the air, sharp and pointed, but Leavitt didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying her with an expression that seemed almost curious. Dangerous? Sure, we can call it that, he replied evenly. But let's not pretend this is a new phenomenon. Every president faces accusations of overreach at some point. The real question is, are we applying these labels fairly? Or are we letting our biases dictate who gets called out and who gets a free pass? The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some nodded along with Leavitt, while others whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of the exchange. A few even pulled out their phones, live tweeting snippets of the debate as it unfolded. It was clear that this wasn't just a conversation between two individuals anymore. It was a clash of ideologies, played out in front of hundreds of people, and thousands more watching online. The journalist hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She knew Leavitt had a point, but admitting it felt like conceding ground. Instead, she doubled down, her tone sharper now. You keep deflecting by bringing up past administrations, but that doesn't change the reality of what happened under Trump. His rhetoric divided the country. His policies undermined norms. And yes, his actions toward the press were unprecedented. Leavitt listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he took a deep breath before responding. Unprecedented? Let's talk about that word for a second, he said, his voice steady. Every presidency brings its share of firsts, things no one has seen before. Does that automatically make them bad? Or does it simply reflect the unique challenges of the time? Look at FDR expanding executive power during the Great Depression and World War II. Was that unprecedented? Absolutely. Did it save the country? Many would say yes. His response drew murmurs from the crowd. Some agreed with him, nodding thoughtfully, while others frowned, clearly unconvinced. The journalist opened her mouth to argue further, but Leavitt held up a hand, signaling he wasn't done yet. Here's the thing, he continued. We can debate semantics all day, but at the end of the day, leadership is messy, it's complicated, and if we only criticize leaders when they don't align with our views, then we're missing the bigger picture. The journalist bristled at his implication. So you're saying I'm biased? She shot back, her voice tinged with frustration. That I'm only criticizing Trump because of my political beliefs? Leavitt shrugged, his gesture casual but deliberate. I'm not saying anything about your personal beliefs. What I am saying is that bias exists on both sides, and it clouds judgment. If we want real accountability, we need to rise above it. Otherwise, we're just fueling division. The room fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking in. Even the moderator seemed unsure of how to proceed, glancing nervously between the two speakers. For a moment, it felt like the entire event was teetering on the edge of chaos. But then, unexpectedly, the journalist did something surprising. She softened. "Okay," she said, her tone quieter now, almost reflective. "Let's say you're right. Let's say bias plays a role in how we view these issues. What's the solution? How do we hold leaders accountable without falling into that trap?" It was a bold move, shifting from confrontation to curiosity. The audience perked up, sensing a shift in the dynamic. Leavitt, too, seemed taken aback, but only for a moment. He smiled faintly, appreciating the pivot. "That's the million-dollar question," he admitted. "And honestly, there's no easy answer. But I think it starts with honesty, with acknowledging our own biases and striving to see the full picture. It means looking at facts, not headlines, context, not sound bites." His response resonated with the crowd. People began nodding slowly, their expressions thoughtful. Even the journalist seemed to relax a little, though her guard was still up. She scribbled something quickly in her notebook, perhaps jotting down a follow-up question or reflecting on the exchange. Whatever it was, the tension in the room eased ever so slightly. But just as the moderator started to steer the conversation toward another topic, the journalist raised her hand again. "One last thing," she said, her voice firmer now, regaining some of her earlier confidence. "If we're talking about accountability, shouldn't we also hold the media responsible? After all, sensationalism sells. Isn't that part of the problem?" The question caught Leavitt off guard, but only for a split second. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Touché," he said, his tone light but sincere. "Yes, the media has a role to play too. Sensationalism distorts reality, and that's a problem. But ultimately, responsibility lies with all of us. As consumers of information, as voters, as citizens, we have to demand better." The audience erupted into applause, breaking the spell of tension that had gripped the room. Both speakers stood, quietly for a moment, taking in the reaction. They had gone toe-to-toe, pushing each other to think deeper and articulate their points more clearly. And while neither had emerged completely victorious, both had earned respect for their passion, their intellect, and their willingness to engage in honest dialogue. As the panel moved on to other topics, the buzz in the room remained electric. Attendees whispered excitedly about the exchange, replaying key moments in their minds. Outside, social media feeds were flooded with clips and commentary, turning the debate into a national conversation. For many, it was a reminder of why discussions like this mattered, a chance to challenge assumptions, confront biases, and seek common ground. For the journalist, however, the battle wasn't entirely over. She had held her own against a seasoned opponent, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been pushed to her limits. As she packed up her things after the event, she glanced across the room at Leavitt, who was surrounded by admirers and well-wishers. There was no animosity in her gaze, just a quiet determination. This wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning. This part keeps the momentum going, adds depth to the characters, and ensures the audience stays hooked. Let me know if you'd like to continue with part 4. As the event wrapped up, the energy in the room lingered like the afterglow of a fireworks display, bright, intense, and impossible to ignore. Attendees milled about, exchanging thoughts and debating what they'd just witnessed. Some praised Leavitt for his calm logic and ability to turn the conversation on its head, while others defended the journalist, admiring her persistence and willingness to challenge him. The buzz wasn't confined to the venue. It spilled out into the digital world almost instantly. Within minutes, snippets of the heated exchange began flooding social media. Clips of Leavitt's sharp rebuttals were shared alongside captions like, "Mic drop moment," or, "This is how you handle tough questions." Meanwhile, posts supporting the journalist highlighted her courage in taking on such a formidable opponent. Comment sections erupted with arguments, memes, and hot takes, each side digging in their heels. For many watching online, this wasn't just a debate, it was a proxy war for broader political divides. Back inside the hall, the journalist stood near the exit, clutching her notebook tightly. Her face was a mix of frustration and determination, as if she were replaying the entire encounter in her mind, analyzing every word she'd said, and every word she wished she could take back. She knew she hadn't walked away victorious, but that didn't mean she was defeated. If anything, the experience had lit a fire under her. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Leavitt, on the other hand, seemed unfazed by the whirlwind swirling around him. He moved through the crowd with ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. People approached him eagerly, some offering congratulations, others asking follow-up questions. Despite the chaos of the day, he carried himself with the same composed demeanor that had anchored him during the debate. To an outsider, it might have seemed like he'd won the argument outright. But those who knew him understood that winning wasn't his goal. His mission was always to provoke thought, to push people to look beyond surface-level narratives. Amidst the commotion, a young man approached the journalist hesitantly. He couldn't have been more than 25, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say, I think you did great." You really made him work for it. The journalist looked at him, surprised but grateful. "Thanks," she replied with a small smile. "It wasn't easy, but honestly, that's kind of the point, right? These conversations should challenge us." The young man nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, exactly. It's refreshing to see someone actually engage instead of just yelling past each other. I wish more people would do that." His words stuck with her as she watched him walk away. They reminded her why she'd chosen this line of work in the first place, to spark meaningful dialogue even when it was uncomfortable. But they also underscored the weight of the responsibility she carried. Every question she asked, every statement she made, had ripple effects far beyond the immediate audience, and today, those ripples had turned into waves. Meanwhile, Leavitt found himself cornered by a group of reporters eager for sound bites. One of them shoved a microphone toward him and asked, "Do you think today's exchange will change how people view accountability and leadership?" Leavitt paused, considering the question carefully. "I hope so," he said finally. "But let's be clear. Accountability isn't something we can pin on one person or one party. It's a collective effort. We all play a role in holding leaders accountable, whether we're journalists, voters, or just everyday citizens paying attention. My goal today was to remind people of that." His answer satisfied some, but others pressed harder. "What about the criticism you faced? Some are saying you dodged the real issues." Leavitt chuckled softly, his expression unwavering. "Criticism comes with the territory. But here's the thing. If pointing out inconsistencies makes me guilty of dodging, then so be it. I'd rather risk being misunderstood than stay silent when I see double standards at play." The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, capturing every word. When the scrum finally dispersed, Leavitt stepped aside, taking a moment to breathe. Despite his outward calm, he felt the weight of the day pressing down on him. Engaging in debates like this took its toll, not because he doubted his own convictions, but because he knew how polarizing these topics could be. Still, he believed deeply in the importance of having these conversations, no matter how messy they got. Outside the venue, the journalist stood alone for a moment, scrolling through her phone. Notifications poured in, emails from colleagues, messages from friends, tweets tagging her in heated discussions. Some praised her resilience while others tore her apart, accusing her of bias or poor preparation. She sighed, pocketing her phone and staring out at the city skyline. The pressure was immense, but she reminded herself why she kept showing up. Because someone had to ask the hard questions, even if the answers weren't always satisfying. As the evening wore on, both speakers retreated to separate corners of the city. Leavitt headed to a quiet cafe, where he ordered a coffee and pulled out his laptop. He spent the next hour drafting a blog post reflecting on the day's events, careful to frame his thoughts in a way that encouraged constructive dialogue rather than further division. Across town, the journalist sat in her hotel room reviewing her notes and jotting down ideas for future pieces. She knew she needed to refine her approach, to sharpen her arguments without losing sight of her core values. Neither of them realized it at the time, but their paths would cross again soon enough. The debate may have ended, but its impact was far from over. For now, though, they were content to process the day in their own ways, each carrying lessons learned and challenges ahead. By the time night fell, the internet was ablaze with reactions. Memes mocked both sides, op-eds dissected every nuance of the exchange, and hashtags trended globally. What started as a single question had become a cultural moment, sparking conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces across the country. Whether people agreed or disagreed, one thing was undeniable. The discussion mattered. And for both Leavitt and the journalist, that was enough. For now. This part keeps the story moving forward, delves into the emotional and intellectual aftermath for both characters, and highlights the broader societal impact of their clash. Let me know if you'd like to continue with part 5. The next morning, the aftermath of the debate felt like a storm that refused to settle. Social media timelines were still flooded with reactions, some praising Leavitt's calm reasoning, others defending the journalist's tenacity. News outlets churned out articles dissecting every angle of the exchange, turning what had started as a single question into a sprawling national conversation. It wasn't just about accountability anymore. It was about how we engage with opposing viewpoints in an era of deep division. For the journalist, waking up to the flood of notifications was both exhilarating and exhausting. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the bedside table, lighting up with emails, texts, and social media alerts. She scrolled through them half-heartedly, her mind replaying the events of the previous day. Some messages were supportive, thanking her for standing her ground against a seasoned debater. Others were harsh, accusing her of bias or poor preparation. One comment in particular caught her eye. "You let him control the narrative. Why didn't you push harder?" She sighed, tossing her phone onto the bed. The criticism stung, but it also fueled her determination. This wasn't the first time she'd faced backlash for her work, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. What mattered most was learning from the experience. She grabbed her notebook and began jotting down ideas, ways to refine her arguments, strategies for staying composed under pressure, and questions she wished she'd asked during the debate. By mid-morning, she decided to step outside for some fresh air. Walking through the bustling streets of the city, she noticed people glancing at their phones, likely catching up on the same debates she'd been obsessing over. A group of college students sat on a park bench, animatedly discussing the event. Curious, she slowed her pace to listen. "I thought she held her own," one of them said. "But he definitely had the upper hand." Another chimed in. "Yeah, but don't you think part of the problem is that we're too quick to take sides, like, why can't we just acknowledge that both perspectives have merit?" The journalist smiled faintly, grateful for the reminder that not everyone viewed these debates in black and white terms. Still, the conversation reinforced her resolve to dig deeper, to find new ways to bridge gaps rather than widen them. She continued her walk. She made a mental note to reach out to colleagues who might offer fresh insights or suggest angles she hadn't considered. Meanwhile, Leavitt was also navigating the fallout from the debate. He spent his morning fielding interview requests and responding to emails from supporters and critics alike. Despite the attention, he remained focused on the bigger picture. For him, the real victory wasn't in dominating the conversation. It was in sparking reflection. That's why, after clearing his inbox, he turned his attention to drafting a podcast episode inspired by the event. In the recording, he spoke candidly about the importance of engaging with differing opinions. "We live in a world where tribalism often trumps truth," he said, his voice steady and measured. "People are so eager to defend their side that they forget to ask whether their side is actually right. Accountability isn't partisan, it's universal. And if we're serious about holding leaders accountable, we need to hold ourselves accountable too." His words resonated with listeners, many of whom praised him for addressing the root of the issue, rather than simply rehashing old arguments. But not everyone agreed. Critics accused him of sidestepping specific concerns about presidential power, claiming he'd used rhetorical sleights of hand to avoid answering tough questions. Leavitt read these critiques with a mix of amusement and frustration. He knew it was impossible to please everyone, but he couldn't help feeling a pang of disappointment when people missed the broader point he was trying to make. As the day wore on, the debate continued to dominate headlines. Late-night talk show hosts joked about the exchange. Comedians turned it into skits, and political analysts debated its implications on cable news. For many, it became a symbol of the challenges facing modern discourse, the tension between passion and reason, conviction and compromise. Back at her hotel, the journalist flipped through channels, watching clips of experts weighing in on the event. Some praised her for challenging Leavitt directly, while others dismissed her performance as overly emotional or biased. One commentator struck a chord when he said, "What's fascinating here isn't who won or lost. It's the fact that both participants forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about how we assign blame and demand accountability." Those words stayed with her long after she turned off the TV. They reminded her why she cared so deeply about journalism, not because it was glamorous or easy, but because it gave her a platform to challenge assumptions and spark dialogue. She realized that while she may not have emerged victorious in the traditional sense, she had succeeded in doing something far more important, making people think. That evening, she attended a small gathering hosted by fellow journalists and academics. The room buzzed with lively conversations, ranging from media ethics to the role of public intellectuals in shaping policy discussions. When someone inevitably brought up the debate, she found herself smiling wryly. "It was humbling," she admitted, sipping her drink. "But I think that's a good thing. If we're not challenged, we're not growing." Her honesty earned nods of approval from the group. One attendee leaned forward and said, "You know, sometimes losing a battle can help you win the war." You might not have changed his mind, but you sure got people talking. Across town, Leavitt reflected on similar themes. After spending hours engaging with critics and supporters online, he stepped away from his computer and picked up a book, a collection of essays on leadership and ethics. Reading always helped him clear his head, grounding him in timeless principles rather than fleeting controversies. As he flipped through the pages, he came across a passage that summed up his philosophy perfectly. True accountability begins with humility, the willingness to admit when we're wrong and learn from those who disagree with us. He closed the book feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The debate had been intense, even draining at times, but it had also reaffirmed his belief in the power of honest dialogue. Whether people agreed with him or not, he hoped they walked away thinking critically, not just about the issues at hand, but about how they approached disagreements in their own lives. As the night drew to a close, both Leavitt and the journalist prepared for what came next. Neither knew exactly where this moment would lead, but they shared a quiet confidence that the conversation was far from over. In a world increasingly divided by ideology, their clash served as a reminder that progress often begins with discomfort, and that meaningful change requires courage, patience, and an unwavering commitment to truth. This part dives deeper into the personal reflections and external reactions of both characters, keeping the story engaging while emphasizing the human elements of growth, resilience, and perspective. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with. The next few days unfolded like the final act of a gripping drama, one where no one truly wins but everyone learns something valuable. The debate had become more than just a heated exchange. It was now part of the cultural fabric, sparking conversations in places neither Leavitt nor the journalist could have anticipated. From coffee shops to classrooms, people dissected their arguments, replayed key moments, and debated whose points held more weight. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about what they represented. Two sides of a deeply polarized society trying desperately to find common ground. For the journalist, the days following the event were a whirlwind of reflection and action. She poured herself into her work, determined to channel the energy from the debate into something productive. Her first step was writing an op-ed, a piece that didn't shy away from acknowledging her missteps during the discussion but also doubled down on the importance of holding leaders accountable. "I may not have said everything perfectly," she wrote, "but I stand by the need for transparency and fairness in leadership. If we don't ask tough questions, who will?" The article resonated with readers, many of whom praised her honesty and vulnerability. Some even reached out directly, sharing stories of how her courage inspired them to speak up in their own lives. One message stood out. Thank you for reminding us that it's okay to stumble as long as we keep moving forward." Those words stayed with her, a gentle reminder that growth often comes from discomfort. Meanwhile, Leavitt found himself fielding invitations to speak at conferences, podcasts, and panel discussions. Each opportunity allowed him to expand on the themes he'd touched upon during the debate: accountability, bias, and the dangers of tribalism. But instead of focusing solely on politics, he began weaving personal anecdotes into his talks, making them relatable and human. In one particularly memorable appearance, he shared a story about his early days in government, admitting that he too had once let loyalty cloud his judgment. "It took me years to realize that being loyal doesn't mean defending every decision blindly," he told the audience. "Sometimes true loyalty means speaking truth to power, even when it's uncomfortable. And that applies to all of us, regardless of our roles." His candor struck a chord with listeners, earning him respect even among those who disagreed with his views. Critics still accused him of deflecting responsibility, but their voices were drowned out by supporters who appreciated his willingness to engage openly and thoughtfully. For Leavitt, this shift felt like progress, not because he sought validation, but because it signaled a deeper understanding of the issues at hand. As the week came to a close, both individuals crossed paths again, not physically, but through their respective platforms. The journalist published another piece, this time exploring the role of media in shaping public perception. Drawing inspiration from the debate, she argued that sensationalism often overshadowed substance, leaving audiences divided rather than informed. "We can do better," she concluded, "and we must." Leavitt responded indirectly, penning an essay that echoed her sentiment. He wrote about the responsibility of journalists, analysts, and citizens alike to prioritize facts over narratives. "In a world drowning in noise," he said, "the quiet pursuit of truth is revolutionary." Though neither explicitly mentioned the other, their words formed an unspoken dialogue, a bridge between perspectives that had once seemed irreconcilable. By the end of the week, the initial fervor surrounding the debate began to subside, replaced by quieter yet equally meaningful conversations. People started asking harder questions, not just about presidential power or accountability, but about themselves. Were they guilty of cherry-picking facts? Had they ever dismissed valid criticism simply because it came from someone on the other side? These introspections rippled outward, influencing workplaces, families, and communities. For the journalist, the experience became a turning point. She realized that while winning debates mattered, fostering understanding mattered more. Her newfound focus wasn't on tearing down opponents, but on building bridges, even if it meant starting with small, incremental steps. She began collaborating with colleagues across the ideological spectrum, co-authoring articles that presented multiple viewpoints without sacrificing depth or integrity. Readers noticed the change, applauding her efforts to create space for nuanced discussions. Leavitt, too, embraced a similar evolution. He continued engaging in public discourse, but with a renewed emphasis on humility and empathy. He made it a point to listen actively, whether addressing critics online or participating in live Q&A sessions. When someone challenged his views, he responded not with defensiveness but with curiosity, inviting them to share their perspective. This approach earned him new allies and deepened existing relationships, proving that respectful disagreement could lead to mutual growth. Months later, the debate remained a touchstone for both of them. The journalist referenced it occasionally in her writing, using it as a case study for navigating difficult conversations. Leavitt cited it in interviews, describing it as a moment that reinforced his belief in the power of open dialogue. Though they never directly interacted again, their paths continued to intersect indirectly, their ideas influencing each other in subtle ways. Ultimately, the legacy of their clash wasn't defined by who won or lost. Instead, it lay in the ripple effects, the countless discussions it sparked, the minds it opened, and the bridges it helped build. In a time when division often overshadowed connection, their exchange served as a testament to the value of challenging assumptions, embracing discomfort, and striving for accountability, not just in leaders, but in ourselves. And so, the debate faded from headlines, but its impact endured. For those who had followed the story closely, it became a reminder that meaningful change rarely happens overnight. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to engage with those who see the world differently. Both Leavitt and the journalist embodied this spirit in their own ways, proving that even in moments of conflict, there's always room for growth and always hope for understanding. This concluding part ties together the themes of growth, reflection, and the broader societal impact of their encounter, leaving readers with a sense of resolution and optimism. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. The story might have seemed like it was winding down, but life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Just as the journalist and Leavitt were settling into their respective routines, each shaped by the lessons they'd learned from their fiery exchange, a new twist emerged that neither could have anticipated. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a public spectacle this time. Instead, it came in the form of an unexpected invitation. A few weeks after the debate, both received emails inviting them to participate in a special panel discussion hosted by a prominent nonprofit organization. The theme? Bridging divides in polarized times. At first glance, the idea seemed straightforward enough. Bring together thought leaders from different backgrounds to discuss how society could move past its divisions. But what made this event unique was its format. Instead of traditional speeches or Q&A sessions, participants would engage in structured dialogues designed to foster collaboration rather than competition. The journalist hesitated when she saw the email. On one hand, she appreciated the intent. Behind the invitation, it aligned perfectly with her recent efforts to promote constructive conversations. On the other hand, the thought of sharing a stage or even a room with Leavitt again gave her pause. Their last encounter had been emotionally draining, and she wasn't sure she was ready to revisit that dynamic so soon. Still, something about the message resonated with her, a quiet challenge to step outside her comfort zone once more. Leavitt, too, felt conflicted when he read his own invitation. He admired the nonprofit's mission and believed wholeheartedly in the importance of bridging divides, yet he couldn't deny the tension that still lingered between him and the journalist. Would their presence together overshadow the purpose of the event, or could they rise above their differences and model the very behavior the panel aimed to encourage? After some deliberation, both accepted the invitations, not because they were eager to relive their earlier clash, but because they recognized the opportunity for growth. If nothing else, they owed it to themselves and to the audiences who had followed their journey to try. When the day of the panel arrived, the atmosphere was markedly different from their previous encounter. Held in a cozy auditorium filled with warm lighting and circular tables, the setting encouraged connection rather than confrontation. Attendees included community leaders, educators, students, and everyday citizens, all united by a shared desire to understand one another better. There was no podium this time, no bright lights casting shadows, just chairs arranged in a circle, fostering intimacy and openness. As the moderator introduced the panelists, the journalist glanced across the room at Leavitt. For a moment, their eyes met, and though neither smiled, there was a flicker of mutual respect, a silent acknowledgement of the road they'd traveled since their last meeting. When it was their turn to speak, the moderator framed the discussion not as a debate but as a collaborative exploration of ideas. "Let's start with a simple question," the moderator said, addressing the group. "Why do you think we struggle so much to find common ground these days?" The journalist leaned forward, her voice steady but thoughtful. "I think part of it comes down to fear," she began. "We're afraid of being wrong, of losing control, of the narrative. And when we feel threatened, it's easy to retreat into our corners and dig in deeper." Leavitt nodded slowly, picking up where she left off. "Exactly," he added. "But I'd also argue that technology plays a role. Social media algorithms feed us content that reinforces our existing beliefs, creating echo chambers. Before we know it, we're convinced that everyone outside our bubble is the enemy." Their responses set the tone for the rest of the discussion. Rather than trading barbs or trying to outwit each other, they built on one another's points, weaving a tapestry of insights that reflected their shared humanity. The audience listened intently, captivated not just by what they said, but by how they said it, with humility, patience, and a genuine willingness to listen. At one point, the moderator posed a provocative question. If you could go back and change anything about your approach during disagreements, what would it be? The journalist didn't hesitate. I'd focus less on winning and more on understanding, she admitted. There's a difference between arguing to prove a point and engaging to learn something new. I'm still learning how to strike that balance. Leavitt chuckled softly, nodding in agreement. Same here, he said. I used to think clarity meant having all the answers. Now I realize it's about asking the right questions and being okay with not knowing everything. Their candor earned applause from the audience, breaking the spell of seriousness that had hung over the room. It was a moment of levity, a reminder that despite their differences, they were simply human beings navigating a complex world. As the panel drew to a close, the moderator asked one final question. What gives you hope for the future? This time, the journalist spoke first. People, she said simply. Every day I see individuals stepping up, whether it's teachers fostering critical thinking in their classrooms, activists working toward justice, or neighbors helping each other through tough times. Change starts small, but it adds up. Leavitt echoed her sentiment, adding his own perspective. I agree. What gives me hope is resilience, the fact that even after moments of division or despair, we keep coming back to the table. We keep trying. That's proof that we haven't given up on each other. The room erupted in applause, not just for their words, but for the example they'd set. By choosing collaboration over conflict, they reminded everyone present, including themselves, that progress isn't about erasing differences. It's about finding ways to coexist despite them. In the weeks that followed, the panel became a symbol of possibility. Clips from the event went viral, inspiring countless viewers to seek out meaningful conversations in their own lives. For the journalist and Leavitt, the experience marked a turning point, not just in their personal journeys, but in their shared commitment to fostering understanding. Though their paths diverged once more, they carried forward the lessons they'd learned. The journalist continued championing nuanced storytelling, while Leavitt advocated for empathy-driven leadership. Neither forgot the unlikely partnership they'd formed, however fleeting it may have been. And perhaps that was the greatest takeaway of all, that even in moments of disagreement, there's always potential for connection, if we're brave enough to embrace it. This additional part introduces a fresh scenario that ties the characters' arcs together in a hopeful and impactful way, emphasizing themes of growth, collaboration, and unity. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks. The panel may have ended, but its impact lingered in ways neither the journalist nor Leavitt could have predicted. The event wasn't just a conversation. It was a catalyst, a spark that ignited changes both small and profound. In the days and weeks that followed, the ripple effects of their collaboration began to surface in unexpected places, proving that even brief moments of connection can leave lasting impressions. For the journalist, life took on a new rhythm after the panel. She found herself more intentional about her work, choosing stories not just for their shock value or viral potential, but for their ability to foster understanding. One project in particular stood out, a series of interviews with people from vastly different walks of life who had overcome deep divisions to find common ground. From former political rivals turned allies to estranged family members reuniting, each story highlighted the power of empathy and dialogue. One interview resonated deeply with her, an elderly man who had spent decades as a staunch conservative, until his granddaughter, a progressive activist, challenged him to see the world through her eyes. At first, their conversations were tense, filled with heated arguments and slammed doors. But over time, they learned to listen, not to win, but to understand. By the end of the interview, the man admitted that while he still disagreed with many of his granddaughter's views, he respected her courage to stand up for what she believed in. She taught me something important, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That love is stronger than ideology. The journalist walked away from that interview feeling inspired. It reminded her of her own journey, the evolution she'd undergone since the debate with Leavitt. She realized that growth often comes not from being right, but from embracing complexity, from recognizing that people are more than the labels we assign them. This realization fueled her determination to keep pushing boundaries, to create content that challenged audiences to think critically and feel deeply. Meanwhile, Leavitt's perspective shifted in subtle yet significant ways. After the panel, he received an influx of messages from people who had been moved by his words. Some thanked him for modeling humility and openness, while others shared personal struggles they faced in navigating polarized environments. One email, in particular, struck a chord. It was from a young teacher who had attended the event and felt inspired to incorporate similar principles into her classroom. "I've always believed education should be about more than facts and figures," she wrote. "But I didn't know how to teach my students to engage respectfully with opposing viewpoints until I heard you speak. Now, I'm starting a weekly discussion group where kids can practice listening and asking questions without judgment. Thank you for giving me the courage to try." Leavitt read the message several times, each word reinforcing his belief in the importance of fostering critical thinking and empathy. He decided to take action himself, partnering with educational organizations to develop workshops aimed at teaching these skills to students and educators alike. His goal wasn't to impose his views, but to equip others with tools to navigate disagreements constructively. As he traveled across the country delivering these workshops, he noticed a recurring theme: fear. Many participants admitted they avoided difficult conversations altogether because they were afraid of saying the wrong thing or being misunderstood. Leavitt listened intently, sharing his own experiences of missteps and growth. "It's okay to feel uncomfortable," he told them. "In fact, it's necessary. Growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. It happens when we're willing to step into uncertainty and trust the process." His approach resonated deeply, earning him praise from educators and community leaders alike. Yet despite the accolades, he remained grounded, focusing less on recognition and more on the tangible impact of his efforts. For every workshop attendee who left feeling empowered to engage differently, he saw proof that change was possible, one conversation at a time. Back in the public eye, the journalist and Leavitt continued to cross paths indirectly, their influence intertwining in surprising ways. A documentary filmmaker approached them separately, proposing a joint project exploring the art of constructive disagreement. Initially hesitant, both eventually agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to extend the lessons of the panel to an even wider audience. The resulting film, titled Finding Common Ground, followed individuals and groups working to bridge divides in various contexts, from divided communities rebuilding trust after conflict to corporate teams learning to collaborate despite differing priorities. The journalist and Leavitt appeared briefly in the film, reflecting on their own journey and the importance of staying open to growth. Their segments weren't polished or rehearsed. Instead, they spoke candidly about their vulnerabilities, missteps, and hopes for the future. When the documentary premiered, it sparked widespread acclaim. Audiences praised its authenticity and relevance, calling it a much-needed antidote to the toxicity plaguing modern discourse. For the journalist and Leavitt, the film served as a reminder of why they'd started down this path in the first place: to inspire others to embrace discomfort and seek connection. Time passed, and the initial fervor surrounding their collaboration gradually faded, yet the seeds they had planted continued to grow. Schools adopted curricula based on the principles they'd championed. Community organizations hosted dialogues modeled after the panel's format. Even social media platforms began experimenting with features designed to reduce echo chambers and encourage respectful engagement. Neither the journalist nor Leavitt sought credit for these developments. They understood that meaningful change rarely has a single author. It's the result of countless contributions, big and small. Still, they couldn't help feeling a quiet pride knowing they had played a part in shaping the narrative. Years later, when asked about their legacy, both offered humble reflections. The journalist described her role as simply amplifying voices that might otherwise go unheard. "I don't have all the answers," she said during a podcast interview. "But if I can help someone feel seen or inspire them to ask better questions, Then I've done my job. Leavitt echoed a similar sentiment. Legacy isn't about leaving monuments behind, he wrote in an essay. It's about planting seeds and trusting others to nurture them. If I've contributed to creating spaces where people feel safe to disagree and brave enough to listen, then I consider that a life well lived. Their words captured the essence of what they'd achieved together, not perfection, but progress. Not agreement, but understanding. And in a world increasingly defined by division, that was no small feat. This concluding part emphasizes the long-term impact of their actions, tying together themes of legacy, growth, and collective effort. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments.